Hi everybody, this is Carly and here's my presentation on my ideal future classroom. As you can see here, I have decorated my introduction slide with short phrases or words that demonstrate and summarize my classroom environment philosophy. So as you can see, a lot of my ideal classroom is based around positive relationships, a community feel, kindness and respect, and having all voices be able to be heard. So I'll just give you a second to look over these because I think they're really important to my presentation. Okay, so for the first aspect of classroom climate, I'm going to talk about an encouraging intellectual climate that I would like to have in my future classroom. As you can see, I brought a lot of attention to my first bullet point here, and I capitalized or made the word differentiation larger. The reason I did this is because I personally think that differentiation is a key aspect to having a strong intellectual classroom climate. Differentiation is ensuring that all students are challenged to the best of their personal ability. And actually, in most of my elementary education classes this far, we have talked a lot about differentiation and its importance, and that has kind of stuck with me. I think that every student has strengths and every student has weaknesses, but it is our job as teachers to highlight each student's strengths and build upon their weaknesses throughout the entirety of the year, because every student has the ability to achieve to the best that they can. And as teachers, we have the opportunity to let that shine in each student. Also, when reviewing my notes from the textbook, Practical Classroom Management, one thing that I highlighted in my notes was set high expectations for all students. So as you can see, that's the next bullet point right here. I think that this is something that has been talked about a lot in managing the learning environment and in several of my other classes. It's really important to set high expectations for all students, and when you set high expectations for a student, studies show that they tend to achieve at a higher rate. And a lot of times we think just set high expectations for those high students that can handle them, but actually this sometimes works best for those low students that really need that push. And you'll be amazed at how well they perform, because they can perform well, but when we set them to this low expectation, they lose their drive and they lose their encouragement to actually perform that well. Okay, so moving on. I also wrote that students deserve to receive descriptive feedback on their work. In the textbook, on page 42, actually, it states the importance of giving clear descriptive feedback to students. And the textbook says, research indicates that when teachers increase their rate of specific praise, there is a reduction in disruptive student behavior, and the number of negative statements teachers make to students is decreased, and there is an increase in on-task student behavior. So, going off of that, I think it's important to encourage students to make mistakes and show students that sometimes making a mistake is the best learning that there is. So in my future classroom, I not only want to have several opportunities for hands-on learning, but give students a variety between collaborative, whole group, partner work, and then independent study work to meet the needs of all of my students' learning preferences. So then here are a few different photos of what I imagine the intellectual climate of my room to look like. I love these different types of learning nooks, and I think by incorporating them into the classroom, it provides students with different interests and abilities the chance to find their safe spot within the classroom. So they don't necessarily have to be reading, writing, or math corners, but they could be like introduction to space technology or agriculture or whatever, just to meet the needs of all those students' interests and let them learn what they want to learn about. I also would be happy to see a classroom like this where it looks like collaborative and hands-on learning is taking place. Students are engaged and they're really getting into their learning. And then kind of a philosophy that I learned in managing the learning environment and kind of that I'm sticking with is just because a classroom is quiet does not necessarily mean that learning is not taking place. So a loud classroom sometimes can definitely mean that the most learning is taking place. All right, so for my social climate slide, I definitely highlighted the importance of positive student-student relationships and positive teacher-student relationships. And those are larger, just like the other one, because I think they're super important. It's really important to create that supportive and positive social environment in your classroom. The textbook, again, talks about how creating positive student and teacher relationship leads to high achievement in students. It also talks about how a healthy and comfortable school for all students leads to a successful school environment. So I think these are key to get these social aspects down to be able to achieve in academics. So then here I also put on my slide collaborative classroom rules and expectations. This is something I would like to do in the first couple days of school with my classroom, no matter what the grade level. When we talked about the first day of school in class a few weeks ago, something that stuck with me was allowing students to collaboratively help make the classroom rules. This is something I wish I could have done as a student in the past, and something that I think is important in setting up your classroom and students for success. So letting those students put in what they want to put in and what they think is important, and then giving that teacher guidance to see, if those rules make sense and if everyone agrees on them. And then I also put down a classroom community where all voices are heard. This kind of builds on that differentiation piece that I talked about before. However, I put in this bullet under social because not only in the learning environment, but in the social aspects of the classroom as well. All students should feel like they're respected and heard in the classroom at all parts of the day, from the first day of school to the last. I think this is something that, needs to happen in the first couple days of school and then needs to progress throughout the year. This is something I would talk about with students again when creating classroom rules, and then I might put this, like, for example, what I might write on the classroom rules would be respect and listen to others, and then explain to students what my expectation of that is in my classroom. And then in this section down here, it's a little bit smaller, but I also talked about whole class reward systems and intrinsic and extrinsic individual rewards. I've yet to figure out what I want to do in regards to reward systems in my future classroom, but I think it's something that we talked about a lot and kind of played devil's advocate with a lot in our class, and I just put it on there because I think it's something that I want to make sure that I include. I just need to figure out how I want to include that. So then finally down here I included the class suggestions box and a personal communication between students. I think these are two really important things for both myself and my students. For my quiet students or students that don't quite want to address an uncomfortable situation face to face, I think a class suggestion box or personal letter communication will give students that quiet, anonymous response while still addressing the situation that they need or want to be addressed with the teacher. And then student letters, even if it's not negative, but it also gives students the opportunity to have more one-on-one time and one-on-one interaction with the teacher and for their voices to be heard. So then here's a photo of a classroom giving tree. This is an idea I learned about from reading chapter 2, and I actually really liked it, so I kind of went online and looked up pictures and ideas about it. Basically what students do is they have a bunch of leaves on their desk. It's like in a little stack, and they keep it on the corner of their desk, and when they see a student in their classroom doing a good deed, they write what the good deed was or a nice thing that they said or anything like that, and then they put it on the tree. And I thought that was important because it's encouraging students to watch other students and give them praise rather than just negativity, and that it also encourages praise for those students that were doing something good and that gets recognized, and that's not necessarily extrinsic reward. I would say it's more intrinsic, which I think is really important. So then for this slide, for emotional, I did not use a lot of outside resources to talk about the emotional climate of my future classroom. I kind of did this because I think this is more important to the teacher themselves to come up with, and it's more of kind of just a personal thing. So I would like my future classroom to be a place where all students' voices are heard and students feel emotionally safe and free. And I think one way to do this is make sure that students are emotionally taken care of before academics, so before their schoolwork. If students' emotions are not in line and figured out, there is no way that they can focus or succeed academically. For example, if students had a bad night at home or are worried about what their next meal will come from, or when their dad is coming home, academics are definitely going to be their last priority. So I think that's something that's really important to talk about. And then down here, I talked about, a supportive teacher and peer community, and I think that's a huge thing to incorporate into my future classroom is make sure that those relationships are made so that if a student has a bad day, they feel like they can go to their peers, or they feel like they have a supportive environment where their teacher cares about them, or they feel like they can go to a safe corner in the classroom or go to a school counselor or whatever they feel like they need to do. Then again, the suggestion box is huge because for those students that are having a bad day or need more support, that's another way that they can reach out and get that support that they need without, blatantly raising their hand or calling attention to themselves. Finally, I think a huge thing that we talked about in this class and something that I really liked in my teachers as a student was when teachers welcome students at the door. I think that's huge. It's a great way to get your students, to get to know your students again on a more social and personal level. So I think that's important. And again, here's just a picture of a welcome sign. I want, all my students to feel welcome in the classroom, no matter who they are or where they're from. So finally, I think the physical environment is something we talked about a lot when we read school law in the first couple weeks of class. But one thing I touched on was that having a classroom that is organized, happy, clean, and safe. That means it's easily accessible to all students and teachers. It's organized so students can get those materials that they need quickly and effectively and safely. And it's not dirty, so that's important. And then a lot of what school law talked about was that if you can avoid an accident before it happens, do it. So I think that's huge. You shouldn't have any unnecessary junk laying around the room, or desks out of place, or random items on the floor that kids can trip over and hurt themselves with. So I think that's kind of just, a daily keep the room clean, keep it organized, and keep it accessible. Also, flexible seating arrangements for those students that might need them, whether it's because they have a special need or because they focus better when they're sitting on, a more flexible seat rather than just a typical chair with a desk, that kind of thing. So making it, accessible and flexible for all students. And then another big thing is parents. I think parents should be welcome at all times. There should be kind of an open door policy. And again, there's exceptions, when you're doing testing or certain work that it might not be appropriate for parents to be there. But I think that there should kind of be that open door policy that welcomes them and makes them feel like, they have a chance to help their students with their learning, because having that supportive environment, for the students, I think is really important for their success. And then finally, a big one, no hitting, only hugging. I think that's huge, especially in those younger grades. A big thing to highlight on, we keep our hands to ourselves and we respect others. I think that's huge. And then this was something I just liked. I thought it was cute. Build a classroom your students can call home. And I thought that was so important to kind of wrap up all of the different aspects of classroom climate that I would like in my future classroom. So in conclusion, I think a lot of what I talked about are things that should start at the beginning of the year and progress throughout the year. I think that comes to the physical environment. It should always be clean, always be safe and accessible for students. I think emotional from the start, creating those positive student-student relationships and student-teacher relationships so that students feel safe and feel like they have someone to talk to and feel comfortable. And then when it comes to intellectual, creating that differentiated environment from the start, setting your rules and expectation, getting all that in place, and then building on it throughout the year. I don't think any of these should happen later on in the year or at the end of the year, because I think to build that strong classroom foundation, these things have to happen in the first couple weeks. I had a teacher once tell me that the first 6 weeks of a classroom, of building your classroom and getting to know your class, are pretty much what sets you up for the rest of the year. So I think that's really important. So then in conclusion, if I had to sum up my ideal future classroom in 4 words, I have them listed here. So it would be a differentiated classroom that's supportive, safe, and accessible. So thank you for watching.